we were hoping you could bring with you 4 pieces of paper, 4 paper clips, and a meter of tape. So just while people are dropping in, if you hopefully have those around, that would be great. But we are going to go ahead and begin. So first off, thank you to everyone for joining us today. Today's session is PLN number 2, Tweaking and Fortifying the Science Program. So this is one of a series of PLNs and webinars, basically aimed at supporting administrators in your implementation of the new science curriculum back at your schools. This is a collaborative project between our 3 associations, CPCO, OPC, and ADFO, as well as the Ministry of Education. So welcome back to those of you who have joined us before, and welcome to those of you who are new and just joining us for the first time. You'll definitely find a place for yourself today. If we could just move to the next slide. And we just would like to begin with a land acknowledgement. And I would like to begin by acknowledging the ancestral and treaty lands of the Mississauga Anishinaabe, also known today as the Mississaugas of the Credit. That is from where I am speaking to you today. And we are grateful to the Mississauga people for their stewardship of this land and our invitation to share this land. I continue to do my own personal learning journey in relation to the Anishinaabe histories, people, and the ongoing presence of the Anishinaabe Nation. I had a superintendent's meeting this week and had a knowledge keeper guest continue to do some of this extended learning. And the more we learn, the more we know and understand. And so it's important that we know we are reminded that we are guests who have been invited to this beautiful earth that we are on. And this is an important reflection for us because it reminds us that as guests, it is a privilege for us to inhabit these lands, and we also have a duty and responsibility to care for this land, and that includes the water, the animals, and the land itself. I would also like to encourage any of you to acknowledge the lands on which you have been joining us today, and if you could just add them to the chat. And next slide. Okay, so we're going to begin by just reviewing today's learning goals. Today's session is focused on ensuring alignment. So we're going to explore some ways of tweaking and fortifying some of the current practices in science by making some connections to curriculum. You're going to learn a little bit more about the tweak and fortify piece in a few minutes. We're also going to look at developing a problem-solving mindset and an inquiry-based thinking approach to the science curriculum, and we're going to make specific connections to the engineering design process. And finally, a good chunk of our time is going to be allocated to breakout group discussions that will happen towards the end. The aim of that is really to support your very specific leadership moves and next steps. So we do have some questions that we've prepared to help facilitate the discussion, but we are really hoping that the conversation is organic and we will go where the conversation leads because obviously that's where your need will be. And so we really hope to take advantage of that time to learn from each other in that time slot. So at this time, I'm going to pass it on to Erica, who's going to get us started.
Hi, everyone. I'm Erica Gillespie. And so my job today is looking at the tweak and fortify piece. We've borrowed this language a bit from some work that had been done a number of years ago through the Critical Thinking Consortium. And in some of the work in our board that we did around that, we talked a lot about how we don't want to throw out the things that we've done when we have a new curriculum or when we take a new approach or we look at something from a different lens. We want to look at how we can take the parts and really think critically about the parts that are great about what we're doing, and then look at tweaking and fortifying them to meet the needs of the changes, of our new perspectives, of our new learning. So in light of that, we have a little task here that you might have seen something similar to this before, or maybe done something like this in a classroom when you were a teacher or in an activity with the staff or something like that. So we're going to give you 5 minutes. Just reach around you 4 pieces of 8.5 by 11 papers, regular paper from your recycling bin or your scrap paper or a pad you have beside you, 4 pieces of paper. approximately 1 meter of tape. If you don't have measuring tape there, you can just sort of guesstimate a meter of tape, and 4 paper clips. Big ones, small ones, doesn't matter, whatever paper clips you happen to have on your desk. We're going to give you 5 minutes. We'll mute. We'll ask you to do your best to build the tallest freestanding structure. That means you can't use the tape to tape it to the desk. It has to stand by itself, freestanding, as tall as you can, by independently, and then we're going to come back here and do a little show and tell of what you managed to create. You are able to use things like scissors or a ruler. They can't be part of the structure, but you can use those to facilitate your task. So I have my handy Apple Watch set here ready for a 5-minute timer, and hopefully you have your materials ready. So we'll say go. STEM strand of the curriculum, and there are some grade 3 curriculum connections there around engineering design process to design, build, and test devices, practical applications of science in the home and community, really looking at real world problems and how those could be addressed, and then investigating how science and technology is connected with other subject areas. Very similar expectations in the grade 7 curriculum. And then in the next slide, we look how that connects to the D strand of structures and mechanisms, looking at understanding form and function, looking at gravity, symmetry. Mark was explaining some of his strategy there around some of that, how, you know, and I talked about factors that caused my structure to fail, like the leg splaying, and thinking about how engineers might use these kind of things to try to figure out solutions to those sort of real world problems. And on the next slide, even connecting into mathematics, a little harder in grade 7, but in grade 3, we look at composing and decomposing structures. We talk about shapes. So we talked about cylinders in this conversation, and using triangles and those kind of things. So we can bring, from the STEM perspective, bring the math into it. We didn't put curriculum expectations here related to things like art or language arts, and all of those things. I can already start to think of ways that we could be bringing that into the classroom as well, media, so on and so forth. So I think encouraging teachers to look at how that curriculum, cross-curricular connection could be made to an activity like this is a really good starting point. And then on our next slide, we wanted to have us go into some breakout groups for a few minutes and just look at these questions and think some more from your expertise. What are some things that you think that we could do with this task to tweak and fortify, to level it up into something that would really meet those expectations? So in general, the way we introduced it, no background, it really was a team building activity, right? We could maybe use it as a little bit of a diagnostic to see what students know or thinking around science concepts, but we didn't really add much to that the way that we presented it to you today. So one group we will have look at the jam. We have a Jamboard that I'll put in the post in the chat in a second, and one group will look at slide 1 of the Jamboard to put in some ideas there on how you could level up this more traditional task to meet some of those expectations that we posted in the slide deck. The second one would be, what would you do with this task to make it more engineering design focused? Then the third one, you'll notice we used sheets of paper. I've usually seen this in a class around things like straws, using straws or spaghetti, something like that. We chose to use paper and think about how could that open up opportunities for thinking and experimenting. What's different about that than what we would get with a straw or a spaghetti tower? The fourth group would look at what conversations might we want to have before we moved into this if we really wanted to make those strong connections. And then fourth, are there real world problem solving that could be approached? And Luciana put some connections in there around where that real life piece of our curriculum can also focus on equity, social justice, and those kind of things. So that group, when they're looking at groups, that fifth slide, if you can think about things that might fit in there with that focus on equity as well, so that we're bringing that competency into this activity as well. So I will post the Jamboard right now into the chat, And I will ask Brad to put us into 5 groups. And if you are in group 1, you'll do slide 1. If you're in group 2, slide 2, and so forth. We will join into some of those groups as well and help you to document your thoughts on the Jamboard.
Sorry, how long do you guys want to be in the rooms for?
I think we had 5 minutes. Is that
5 minutes? Okay.
correct? Yes.
Right. Okay, here we go.
On this one, does anybody have something from their group, their question that came out that they thought either was a question that you still have, or an aha, or something that was shared with your group that that you think would be important for the whole group to see? We will have access to this Jamboard after, but for you to see the other people's slides. But maybe I could look to, I don't know that we had anybody in group 1, correct? I was in group 1 and then I was moved to another group. There was no one there. So my group was, how do we turn this from a team building type activity to an engineering design process? And one of the conversations that we were having in our group was the need for there to be some specific teaching at some point in this activity, looking at real world examples, connecting them to the things that students came up with, and looking at that whole idea of tweaking that design to improve it through that process of thinking and examining what other engineers, what other design processes that we could see in real world situations that might help us to revisit that activity and be more successful, or get a taller tower, or whatever, those kind of things. That was one that we talked about. Group 3, the tasks using sheets of paper over the idea of a straw or spaghetti tower. Were there any thoughts on that slide that group would like to share?
So Doris and I had a conversation about how paper is more versatile in terms of creating shapes, and therefore may bring shape into the conversation as it relates to, you know, being able to create more stability, or being able to reach higher based on the shape that you create with it. So
great, thanks, Lawrence. What about the 4th group? What conversations could be supported before you build the tower? That group had lots of stickies.
Yeah, we were talking about some differences based on particular grade groups. So for younger students, you may need to have them playing with the materials and kind of understanding how to use certain tools like scissors or cutting, or understanding how to manipulate the materials as a starting point. With some of the older students, thinking about drawing from prior knowledge as well, maybe giving them an opportunity to research what towers look like, so that they can actually intentionally plan before they start building, because engineers do plan before they start building. And also maybe some conversations around different shapes, prior knowledge in terms of concepts as well, that might play a factor in the designs that they create.
Thanks, Lisa. And that kind of came up in our group too, the idea of time, that the time factor, the 5-minute time factor made it more competitive as opposed to a thinking task, right? So I think that's what you're describing there too, that time to think and research or envision, plan, all of that. And I'm not sure if we had anyone in group 5 or not. There was Lisa, Jennifer, was it you?
Yeah, it
okay.
was Kathy and I. Sorry, we didn't add our post-its. I'll go back and add them after.
No worries.
But Kathy was a great partner to have because she has a science background, which is very cool. So we had a really good conversation about, for example, offering a variety of materials as opposed to limited materials, and that really kind of showcasing recycled materials. And that adds a real world connect to a true social justice issue right now in terms of waste and reusing, as opposed to having to think we have to create new all of the time. Kathy also had really good points to add around spending more time on task, as you guys had mentioned previously, because that would allow you to actually engage in the productive struggle so that kids can become comfortable with that uncomfortable struggle, but because that struggle is a necessity when it comes to real world problem solving that's going to have to happen because the answers aren't always obvious. So that giving them comfort and allowing them to build that ability to be uncomfortable during the struggle of the thinking.
And me sitting here after work today with my 5-minute timer going off, trying to quickly create a sample for you, and it was tipping over. And that I understand your conversation about productive struggle for sure. The time limit does make that somewhat frustrating, right? So having that time to be able to think it through and plan and undo and redo and those kind of things are really important. Our group had lots of questions about the engineering design process focus, and I didn't answer them all because I know that I'm going to hand that over to Lisa in a second. And I told them that they'd have to wait and hear the big picture answer from Lisa's expertise. So I'll turn that over to Lisa and let you take that part away, Lisa.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a big expectation to solve all the challenges with incorporating engineering design into our science instruction. So if you go to the next slide, I want to kind of speak to the processes that are actually within the science curriculum now. And there's a few different approaches that are now included. And what I want to say here is that we need to think about interweaving opportunities for students to actually try out these various strategies and strengthen their ability to become creative problem solvers. Both the scientific experimentation process in the first graphic and the engineering design process in the second graphic are ways to question, discover, and understand the world around us. They are tools that allows each of us to create solutions to social and environmental justice challenges. For example, the UN Sustainable Development Goals creates a great context to which we can have students explore global challenges, but then bringing them to local challenges in the community. As we create curricular connected experiences for students, we need to remember that diverse perspectives, worldviews, and student experiences do matter. We don't solve problems using these processes without understanding context, developing an understanding of the problem, and drawing from prior knowledge and/or research knowledge to create solutions or exploring ideas. Creating a space for students to engage in this kind of learning from a variety of perspectives, including personal lived experience based on the intersection of their own identities, is so important in the work that we do in science education moving forward. This connects learning to students and community and works towards creating an inclusive space for all learners. So in this diagram, you'll see that there are 4 segments of the process: initiating and planning, performing and recording, analyzing and interpreting, and communicating. And in the graphic here that we've illustrated, we've tried to put the sections of the process to align to those larger categories or larger areas. And you'll see that there are some similarities, right? Both the scientific experimental process defines a problem and its context, and the engineering design process asks us to research and understand a problem. So there are parallel sort of commonalities across the two processes. If we move to the next slide, there is a third process included in the curriculum. It's the scientific research process. And this is also an important part of the problem-solving process. It enables students to define questions and a process to seek out different perspectives, critically think about information and data, develop arguments with supporting evidence, and find ways to summarize and communicate their findings. When we work with students to develop scientific research skills, we need to help them to seek out sources that also elevates diverse perspectives, knowledges, and people. So when I think about, how we teach science, oftentimes the easiest place people go to is maybe a textbook. But does that textbook actually have the diverse perspectives that we need in the text? And I think it's really important for us as educators to ensure that we're looking at diverse perspectives and finding resources that represents the perspectives that have been traditionally missing in our science education programs. If we move to the next slide, what I want to also say here is that these processes are not all separate, that these processes are all interconnected. If we could go to the next slide. And the work that we need to do in our classrooms in our schools is to have students practice each of these processes and ways of thinking and developing mindsets under these three processes, but find ways of interconnecting these processes together, because it's the intersections of these processes, when you know which process to use, how one may inform the other, that flexibility actually creates more creative problem solvers and creates flexible thinkers and adaptable thinkers in STEM education. So when we consider how these processes play out, when we work with our students, we need to consider how the curriculum, connected programs, and experiences affirms Black, Indigenous, racialized, and marginalized students in the classroom. By creating spaces that takes an asset-based approach that enable students to embrace and explore their intersectional identities through these processes. So honoring how students will engage in problem solving, leveraging their personal experiences to also inform where their inquiries will go. If you move to the next slide, we ask teachers to take a look at, one of the ways in which we could support educators is to think critically about the scientific experiments and activities that we do in our classrooms. And some of the questions that we should consider are: what is the problem identified in this experiment? Who designed the experiment? How has the experiment been conducted? How was the data recorded? How was the data analyzed? Who designed this process and why? And what do you think are the learning outcomes of this experiment? And I think there are lots of opportunities for us to open up these activities to take a look at how we have traditionally explored questions in our science classroom to be more inclusive. If we move to the next slide, as an example of an application of a scientific experiment, we know that vinegar and baking soda experiments have been pervasive in all science classrooms. It's easy, it's kitchen chemistry, and it's fun. And if we look at the science behind baking soda and vinegar experiments, it actually produces carbon dioxide gas. And we have something in our science classrooms in schools called the fire extinguisher. And so this experiment, the chemical reaction, produces carbon dioxide gas that's connected to something that's real and applied in schools, in school buildings, the chemistry of safety. But what's really interesting is if you start to look at some of the chemical reactions of other things that are in safety. I know that schools have first aid kits. First aid kits typically have hydrogen peroxide, and hydrogen peroxide actually has an expiry date. It has an expiry date because the chemical reaction of hydrogen peroxide over time is that it decomposes to water and oxygen gas. So though a similar reaction to vinegar and baking soda happens with hydrogen peroxide, both for safety context in schools, you wouldn't want oxygen gas to put out a fire. So, sometimes when we look at what looks like a reaction that looks similar on the surface, when you learn the science or the chemistry, it can have very different outcomes. And I have included some links to what they call the elephant toothpaste experiment, which is the hydrogen peroxide experiment. If you Google search it, it's a fun activity that you can do in the classroom, but similar looking reactions, but very different outcomes. Go to the next slide. What I want to say here is that to kind of close out a very brief overview of some of the thinking processes, is that I want to go back to this idea of inquiry. There are actually different forms of inquiry, and in order to strengthen students' ability to problem solve, it is important for us to scaffold the development of skills through the different types of inquiry. Intentionally deciding which form of inquiry can help students become creative problem solvers and develop strengths in designing more open inquiry questions and investigations. This doesn't happen overnight, right? So we do need to think about holistically what the program needs to look like. When students are provided with choice, it does create an opportunity for students to bring their own perspectives, talents, skills, experiences, and interests into the inquiry. So when we look at open inquiry, there is real value in student-driven inquiry. It opens up these opportunities to apply from an educator's perspective, universal design for learning, thinking about differentiated instruction, and creating culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy. This graphic is an interpretation of a paper, and I'm going to put that paper in the chat for you, because the examples, activities that they use to shape out the different forms of inquiry in this document is quite valuable. So I'm going to pass it over to Jennifer to continue.
Perfect. So at this time, we're going to take an opportunity to go into some breakout rooms to have some conversations. The facilitators will each have some of the guiding questions, but I'm going to
Jennifer, you just muted, sorry.
Sorry about that. I just dropped in the chat a link to the Google Doc that has the questions. The conversation, I know we don't have as much time as we would had hoped, so maybe Brad, if you could set us in groups for about maybe 7 minutes or 8 minutes, just to give us some time to consolidate afterwards. The focus here is really, what are your next leadership moves? So as an administrator, and you are working on facilitating the development of this and the growth of your teachers back at your school, what are the next leadership moves? What are the next processes or action steps that we can have some conversations about to help you move forward in your own school? And we can use some of the guiding questions in the doc to just guide the discussion. So Brad, whenever you're ready.
Yep, 1 second.
No problem. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Thanks for sticking around. We just thought we would take this opportunity, if Brad, if you could just move to the next slide, to maybe try and highlight some of our learning today. So is there anyone who would like to share a part of your discussion? So we're thinking about administrator lens, action steps for moving this forward in our schools.
I can contribute a little bit from our group to get it started. Jennifer, Mark, and I were in the same group, and we talked a little bit about how do you find an entry point that staff can manage, right? So we talked about taking sometimes just one small piece. An example we talked about was the slide that Lisa had around the different types of inquiry and scaffolding inquiry, because sometimes teachers might just jump right to that student-led inquiry and then be astonished when it doesn't work and it crumbles because the students haven't been taught how to do that. So giving them permission to look at those, incorporating those different kinds of inquiry in a scaffolded way might be, for example, one way that you could connect with your staff and get them to give it a try. I know Mark talked about coding and having some teachers who are some experts in coding, bringing some of that to a staff meeting and kind of starting at that point and building on it over time, giving ourselves some grace that we have a lot of other competing priorities in our professional development and in what we're looking for in classes, and how do we pick the things that will really have the most impact and get teachers started in moving forward, or at least recognizing that they need to change or adapt or tweak and fortify some things.
Add another example as well, because my school is doing a lot of work in the area of equity. So making the direct connections to, anti-oppression, anti-racism as connected through science, because it may not be obvious to teachers, and then you may have to intentionally name it and bring them to making connections in science in that regard. So that's another entry point. So basically, big idea, making connections to something small that you can have an entry pathway into the science. Is there another group who would like to share some of your discussion? I know I saw some great things going into the doc.
Our group, I can share a little bit. Our group talked a lot about just as you modeled by having them do an experiment at the beginning, that teachers need the opportunity to experience some of these activities, not just read about them or see them in a document. They actually need to kind of experience them to get the whole effect. So providing time and opportunity for teachers to experiment themselves is really helpful for them to understand some of these concepts.
Yeah, very good. Constructing, like kids have to construct knowledge, and teachers also need to construct knowledge. So that hands-on piece is great. And Luciana made a good comment too in the chat about looking at opportunities to bring a PLN to staff, open dialogue about some of the tweaking of fortifying. So a small group discussion, real engagement and conversation with teachers to talk about suggestions for doing that. Great. Is there another group who'd like to share your conversation?
I could share a little bit about our group. I think that there are commonalities and common themes in terms of experience and activities and the importance of engaging in learning. But some of the participants in our breakout room was sharing a little bit of the strategies that are happening in their districts with designated sort of opportunities for science leads to network, to take workshops and get more focused support that then builds capacity in their school to support other schools. other teachers, other classroom teachers. There was mention of the teacher librarian having certain skills like coding that then supports other staff. So creating sort of a way to support educators by building a community in their buildings. That was one of the big points that came up in our conversation.
Great. Thanks, Lisa. Okay, is there anyone else who would like to share? Nope. All really good ideas, and do save the link to the doc. I can see ideas continuing to be added. And when you come to that place where you're in a position to plan some of the experiences for your teachers, this will help bring some of the ideas back to your attention. So I'll pass it on at this time to Lisa, who's going to close for us.
Yeah. Thank you. So the next slide actually just has some additional information with a link to a document. I've put it in the chat as well. It has been an ongoing document that we keep adding more resources to based on all of the webinars and PLN sessions that we've run so far. And we constantly go back to add things to it. So if you visited it before, it has changed a little bit. In the chat as well, I've added a new resource link to the collaborative work of STAO and OCTI that put together long-range lesson plans for elementary science and tech. And that was new since the last time we were online. So I've added that to that document, as well as links to the recorded sessions of previous sessions are also included in the Google Doc. And I might want to also mention here, there are a couple of publications that will be, I think we're going to share in the chat. Is that right? And that kind of talks a little bit about the equity, diversity, and inclusion work that I do at K2I Academy at the Lassonde School of Engineering. We are currently working with educators across Ontario, also writing teacher resources as we speak, in particular the grade 9 D-Stream science resource. But the front matter part of that resource, which is available online, may be useful as sort of a professional learning opportunity for some of your science, or all your teachers actually, around the equity, diversity, and inclusion piece within science education. So please do take a look. And if you have any questions, I think my contact information is also in the Google Doc resource sharing document as well. So to finish off the session, I just want to say on behalf of everyone here, thank you so much for joining us. And we hope to stay connected. Do follow us on Twitter, and hopefully we'll hear lots of questions from you. And I do believe we're going to put a feedback link in the chat. If you could do us a favor and fill in the feedback form, that would be great.
So as that feedback link comes up, we want to thank everyone for having spent time with us this afternoon, and especially to our presentation team. We are so blessed to have such expertise, both amongst our colleagues and of course, Lisa, and what you bring to the table in terms of the work and the research you've done throughout your career. Know that we're here to support you in this leadership growth opportunity. The articles that you've just received in the chat are downloadable. You can grab them and download them to your own computer. You may find them extremely useful for your own PLN within your network of professionals that you go to in terms of spurring on your own growth, or as an article discussion that you might use with staff. Once again, we want to thank everyone. And Brad, I am wondering if that link can be populated into the chat so people can grab the feedback form before they leave. And in any case, perhaps you can add it to the follow-up email that undoubtedly will go out in the next couple of days.
It's in there already.
Oh, thanks so much.
No worries. And I'll send all the other links out with the follow-up email as well. So there we go.
Thanks so much, folks. It's been a pleasure. We look forward to seeing you again. Be safe, take care of yourself, and may the spirit of the season be with you through these next few weeks. What do we say, 24 sleeps until break? Good night, everybody.
Right.
Thanks,
Good job,
everyone.
everyone. Good job. Thank you.
Thank you.